we go. Now I am definitely live. So for those of you who are having issues getting onto Slack, please just feel free to get onto the Slack link that was shared. So just as a disclaimer for today, my talk is very simply not trying to convince you to use Vue for any recent projects that you are trying to do, but simply hoping that I will inspire you so that you can add it to your toolbox going forward as a super cool web framework. All right. Small thing about me, absolutely love trains. Yet to go like on a slow train ride rather than the Gauw train. If you haven't done so, I highly recommend it. It's quite a cool way to commute. And another super cool thing about trains is that I do find it to be the symbol of the Industrial Revolution and kind of where that kicked off. And we are already in the fourth Industrial Revolution, so everything is changing. We're changing the way we communicate, we're changing the way that we live, and everything is very, very much technology driven. I mean, it is the digital revolution, but I feel like that is a talk for another time. So much like trains, I kind of feel like we have that flow in system development as well. We are the engineers trying to keep everything on track. You have the conductors making sure everything is on time, and then obviously our users are our passengers, hoping that we will transport them safely to where they need to be and that they have a great user experience or just a technological experience in general. All right, so on the screen, I have a quote with words full of wisdom that someone important once said that can make someone feel inspired. So if you're not feeling inspired yet, I don't know, maybe the coffee hasn't kicked in quite yet, maybe you're looking forward to lunch, hopefully this is getting you inspired while I take you on this inspirational journey that is Vue.js. I don't think any one of us can say and sit here that we don't necessarily have a passion for technology in some form, in one way or another. And I think it is that inspiration on even the smallest thing that kind of breeds that passion and kind of fuels that fire in terms of trying to make a difference. So if we unpack the wonderful world of web tools, I think the three major ones that we use today is probably Angular, React, and now Vue.js. And then, of course, there's everything else JavaScript. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is yet another talk about yet another JavaScript framework, but please bear with me. We are getting there. So even you, I don't know how many of you know him, but even me, I wasn't entirely sure who he was until I started reading up about him. So even you probably had really good coffee one morning, or he just was so inspired. So his journey started off at Google, where he actually worked with Angular. And I'm still yet to hopefully talk to him one day and kind of figure out what his way of thinking was. But this person decided that he's going to write his own framework. And he kind of extracted what he loved about Angular, and he thought, okay, how can I make this better? How can I improve on top of this? And that's when he started creating Vue.js. And he didn't really expect it the way to take up in the way that it has. And what's really cool is he's still involved in maintaining it today. So when asked in an interview in terms of what he loves about software development and JavaScript in general, he said, it gives you the ability to just build something and share it instantly with the world. You put it on the web and you get a URL. You can send it to anyone with a browser. And I think that's my job description going forward for people that aren't necessarily in the technical world, because trying to explain what we do can sometimes be quite scary for those who aren't in our field. So how exactly do these wonderful world of web tools compare? So in 2010, obviously we had the amazing FIFA World Cup, but that is also when Angular was launched. Now, yet another disclaimer, long-term support for Angular is kind of stopped, or they're still continuing with the latest packages that they have released, but there is no more. So in 2010, Angular launched, and it was all the rage. I kind of like to think of AngularJS as being decoupled in the sense, because I've got my two-way data bindings, and I've got my components on the one side, and I have my behavior on the other side. Then, in 2013, we obviously had the very awesome film Star Trek Into Darkness, and then Facebook came along, and they decided that they were going to unleash React into the world, and it absolutely blew up. So that is quite cool. And then just a year later, Vue.js came around in 2014. Now, what's really interesting to me is that if we look at Angular, we're currently sitting on version 13.1, and React kind of entered the field, and it became a bit of a game changer because the same code I used to write my components is exactly the same code that dictates my behavior, and that kind of blew everyone's mind for a little bit, kind of made things a little bit easier. And we're sitting on, I think, version 18 or so. I don't know, I'm not working with React at the moment. But then 18, yes. So Vue came around, and Vue 3 was released not too long ago. Now, what's interesting to me is that between 2013 and 2014, these two frameworks entered the game. We're only sitting on Vue 3, so there aren't as many releases and there aren't as many iterations. So that kind of raises the question to me as to, but isn't this a little bit more sustainable and maintainable over time, because I'm not necessarily always worried about keeping things up to date all the time and making sure that my packages are always aligned with the latest and greatest version that's out there. I'm not necessarily continuously worried about breakages. I need to just make sure that the version I'm currently running now supports kind of everything and there aren't like millions of iterations of the thing. So something to think about. So if we take a look at React, we know that it does one thing, and it does things well. It is innovative and disruptive at the same time. So you just need to make sure that you've got spare parts laying around. Then we look at Angular. This bad boy comes fully equipped out of the box. It's all spare parts. So Angular is really cool in the sense of if you want to know more about how the front end actually works, this is where you start. It does get a little bit more tricky, as you do need to get to know associated concepts like TypeScript, but other than that, it does take a little bit more time to master. And then there's Vue. Vue is easy to handle and accessible, especially if you've got somewhat of a background coming from Angular or even React. The two-way data binding will seem familiar, and it is also a component-based framework. So there's a little bit of familiarity there. So I think as developers, we tend to stick to one box. We like to stick to what we know, and we can sometimes be fearful of change. When learning a new framework or even having to adjust to a different team that might use a different framework, the first thing that comes to mind is how long is it going to take me before I can master this, or how quickly can I just get on board to deliver the thing that I need to do. And I kind of feel like we fall short there sometimes. I mean, we have to use our inspiration and passion in order to be willing to learn something new and to be willing to grow. So the biggest questions we always ask ourselves is, how long is it going to take me to master this, and what is it going to mean for my career going forward? You don't necessarily want to be stuck in a framework or a technology that's going to be irrelevant in the next 5 years if it's going to take you 2 years to master it. So you want to try and get on board with something that feels comfortable, feels familiar, and that you know will have a big market presence going forward. So if we look at Angular, obviously Angular's biggest market presence is Google. Like, everyone wants to be like Google. If not, maybe you want to be the next Facebook. And then obviously Vue, for those of you who don't know, Nintendo. And also our biggest friend during lockdown, Netflix, has also started making use of Vue.js. And now the other cool thing about Vue is that it's plug and play. So I can also build it on top of an existing framework. But why necessarily care about all of this? Well, we want fast and furious. We all know what it feels like when a product owner or something comes knocking at our door, and we know that we need to deliver fast and we need to kind of, get ahead with the times, and it's always a hustle and bustle. We don't necessarily want our users to be fast and furious at us, because that's not cool. Let's not do that. The other thing that we want to do, as mentioned, is we want to learn. We want to grow within a specific field. We want to become masters at our craft. So we kind of look at that when we say, okay, cool, I'm willing to learn something new. The other thing is security. We want our users to feel secure and kind of, they trust us, right? They trust us with their information. They trust us to make the right choices. So we want to make sure that they feel secure in using whatever application we are writing. And again, we want to make sure that we have job security in the future going forward. So, as mentioned, we always try and look at, okay, cool, but how long is it going to take me to learn this particular thing? What is the journey to get there? So getting started with React is quite simple. They've got really cool documentation, and I can be set up in about an hour with a little to-do app that's going to explain most basic concepts to me. However, mastering it or doing something a little bit more advanced requires me to make use of third-party packages. Now the question is, because everything is kind of open source and there's billions and billions of node modules and NPM packages out there, which one do I use and which one is the right to choose? How am I going to maintain it? How sustainable is it? Then we take a look at Angular. This is messy. It takes a long time to get used to it. There's a lot of things happening all at once. There's back and forth between what it looks like and what my behavior needs to be. So I would say that the learning path is quite a little bit more steep, but also depending on where you actually want your application to go. And then again, view. You can obviously see I've got a little bit of favoritism going on. I felt it to be quite an open road. So my journey with Vue started about 2 years ago. We were using Vue 2. We're slowly migrating onto Vue 3. And I had just finished a React project. So I am in that position to kind of say, oh my goodness, what is Vue? I had not heard of Vue. I might have, like some of you, seen something on YouTube and we don't really pay attention because, I don't know, like the cat needs to be fed or something else is going on. But Vue felt really, really cool to me at that stage. I very simply said, okay, cool. I probably need to do a little app for myself. I started reading the documentation and I got a sense of ease because immediately I could see, okay, cool, there's something from React that my brain kind of understands and there's something from Angular that my brain kind of understands, so these two are kind of coming together quite nicely. Therefore, I feel like it was an open road journey. I then simply started also with a to-do example, and it was quite simple. It took me less than 30 minutes, and their documentation is really, really on point. If there's something I don't understand, be it the Vuex store in terms of storing data or trying to access something via state, there's oodles and oodles of documentation. And the other thing that stood out to me is that they are very, very explanatory when it comes to using best practice. Because when it comes to mastering a framework, you need to make sure that you are following best practice, not only for you, but also if you then need to transfer that knowledge onto someone else. So if we take a look at a very, very simple example, I have a div, and on that div, I have a p tag where I'm going to be passing in a message, and if I click that button, I'm expecting that message to just be in reverse. What the use is for this, I don't know, but it's just as an example, right? So immediately, if I'm doing this in React, I'm going to import React, and then we get to the cool part, which is the function, and in this example, I'm using state in order to update my message. Now let's see how I would do that in Vue. So very simple, I create a template. This is where my UI is going to sit. I have my div, again, a p tag with a message. I have a v on click, which will then reverse the message if I click on the button. And then I create a new instance of Vue. I pass in my message, and very simply what stood out to me is I didn't necessarily have to worry about too many things. I could just simply use pure vanilla JavaScript to kind of achieve what it is that I wanted to do. A little bit simpler, right? And the other thing is it felt very structured. So whenever you look at a Vue file, it always follows the same pattern. You have your template, you have your script, and then if you so wanted, you can have your CSS or your Sass directly underneath it, imported, or simply on the page. I like structured. I don't think anyone here is like, oh yeah, spaghetti code, that's totally for me. No. Right. So how many of us resonate with this image? If you haven't worked in your pajamas yet, and if you are still working from home, I highly do recommend it. It is quite comfortable.
10 out of 10.
And then this was also me, because let's face it, lockdown was hard. Even me, I used cookies to improve my performance, or just to feel a little bit better about things not compiling, or the fact that I was faced with load shedding whenever I needed to push to prod. So, interestingly enough, during lockdown, many people got into fitness and we kind of started new hobbies and whatever else. What was happening with me is I have a group of friends and everyone was going on about blockchain and they were all talking about concepts that I had no idea about. And one of the things that I constantly hear was, oh, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and have you invested in Ethereum? And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I have an F&B app, can we stop this? So I decided, okay, I'm going to challenge myself and try and learn a little bit more about this. And this is where my 3 buzzwords came in. So blockchain, Telos, and an Anchor wallet, and a good cup of coffee. So that's kind of where it started with me. I wanted to take what I know about Vue and create something in a UI format, or kind of put a picture on something that I could better understand. So I'm thinking, okay, how can I take something that I don't necessarily know a lot about and stick it into something that I know a little bit more about, which is Vue. So very simple, blockchain, as we know, it's just a chain of transactions, and everyone kind of has a copy. I'm not going into detail. Telos just enables me to have like a little bit of a test environment where I can create somewhat of a coin, which I'll take you through now. And an Anchor wallet is just kind of for me to keep an eye on my transactions or how much my balance would be. So for those of you who are interested to try this exercise, these are the links where you can find it, or you can come and chat to me afterwards. Okay. I think that is the end of that. So very simply, one of the first things I found online was a template. I wasn't necessarily concerned about what the thing was going to look like or necessarily what it was going to do. I just wanted to make sure that it worked for me. This is not something that needs to be on a Jira board anyway, so it was a little bit of a fun exercise. So I immediately downloaded the template. And as you can see, if I just take you through some of these things here, again, I can see structure, I see familiarity, and I see something that I can well associate with. So starting off, obviously you have the end of the universe in one single folder, which is our node modules. I have source, which is where I'll obviously store my assets and everything else. And immediately I've got my components, my CSS, my layouts, my pages. Another thing that Vue also does is it makes use of a router. So this is great for single page application development. I can kind of stick everything in my routes and I can go where I need to go when I need to go there. I can obviously make use of the Vuex store should I want to store something. And then very simply, that is how I initiate all of it. I just simply pass in an ID, name app, and I am ready to go. So just to take you through something very, very, very simply, it all looks very chaotic. I'm hoping that it seems, okay, yeah, it looks good. All right, so very simply, very easily, again, we have our template, we have our scripts. This one doesn't really need any styling. But anything that I need to access, I pass through data. I can make use of props, which is, again, another bit of a familiar feel. So I can kind of do what I need to do, how I need to do it. So it gives me a lot of control and things feel safe. So very simply on that. So what this looks like, this is a Telos Quasar template written in Vue, like I've just shown you. I did nothing to this specifically for you guys today, so I didn't make anything pink or blue or yellow or whatever, but if I so wished, I can plug a Firebase instance into it, I can log in using my Google account, I can do all sorts of cool stuff. I can probably put it on, and again, very simple. There's even more documentation that I can read on. So it's very, very cool for me to see that someone decided to take Vue and write a template that I can just simply consume. So very, very simply, the other thing I mentioned that you would need is an anchor wallet. So yes, there is Ultra Melissa at the top. I wanted to use UltraMel, but that was already taken. So another disclaimer, everything that you are seeing is in a test environment because I don't necessarily want to attach actual monetary value because I'm still a bit scared in terms of, you know, Ethereum and all of that. If I, by some chance, lose the key, I lose my money, which is, you know, it's not unlikely for someone like me. So we're not going to do that. So very simply, this is just the anchor wallet. You basically just connect to it. There's a little script if you're interested in having it to kind of get all of that set up. It can also be found on the Telos documentation. But let's send some coins. Hopefully this works. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to send some fake Ultra Melissa coins to someone, and we're going to call it devconf. And I'm going to hit the send button there. All it's going to do is it's going to ask me to now obviously sign this over here. Cool, cool, cool. And then we're going to do that. So other interesting thing, Block.io did support Telos until like 2 weeks ago. They don't do that anymore. So we're going to try and see if we can find the transaction together. Yay. So we're going to go to my wallet. We're going to go there. And then there we can see there is the 200 Ultra that I sent. So the takeaway that I hope that you take from this today is please do try and use Vue. There is a sense of familiarity there. It is slowly picking up. And it is very, very simple to get into, whether you're a junior and you're trying to learn an interesting new framework, or whether you're a senior. This is a great place to start out, especially if someone wants to be reintroduced into the wonderful world of JavaScript. I promise you, Vue 3 and Vue 2 is way better than Vue 1. So if you have dabbled with it before, it has seen immense improvement through its small iterations. Thank you. Are there any questions? Sorry, I flew through that because some people... Okay, and yes, hi.
Two questions.
Sure.
Number one, integration with TypeScript. How easy is that?
So if you are familiar with TypeScript, it is quite simple. You are definitely, TypeScript files can be used. I try and stay clear from TypeScript as far as possible. Unpopular opinion, but it is quite simple to put TypeScript into an app as well. You just create a TypeScript file and you link it up. It's quite simple.
And using it with
No, I'm not using it with Vue, no.
and then composition API versus Vuex. How do you feel about that?
So I personally just use Vuex because it does allow me to do everything that I need to do. There are cool extensions and plugins out there. So it's very easy for me to debug. So if you just install that very simply on the browser, I can actually show you. So obviously, if you install the right extension, very simply, yes, that is great. Please open. There we go. Sorry. Kind of want to show you what the tools are. This has never happened, guys. Like, the Vue tools normally just work. But essentially, if you've got the plugin installed, you can actually see what's happening with your props, what's happening with your component. And the other cool thing is I can kind of split the store. I should not be standing there. I can kind of split the store to kind of say, okay, cool, I only want to check it out on this page, or I want to follow the state management downward through my entire app. So I personally make more use of the store than anything else for my use case. But it's up to you. Cool. Oh, cool. So just to recap the questions that he's asked how easy is it to integrate TypeScript? And the other question he has is the Vue store versus like using a generic API to kind of help storing data. Any other? Yes, Gulk?
Did he ask about the composition API?
We are not talking about the composition API. Yes, he did. No drama, please.
I actually have another question. So, do you sometimes, so I know kind of Vue takes a kind of a very, kind of tries to frame itself as a kind of a middle of the road between Angular and
React, yeah.
Do you sometimes feel that there are drawbacks to that? Not going, like, for example, like React is very specific in terms of that the DOM is a problem. And it's just saying we're going to build our own DOM because the native DOM
sucks.
But like, obviously, so kind of Vue is kind of in between these two worlds. Do you sometimes feel there's drawbacks to kind of having that kind of open?
I think there could be, like, if you've got like an issue with something small, like, I don't know, maybe you're not comfortable with like the two-way data binding that Angular gives, and you're not necessarily in the mood to struggle with that, or even making use of the store, like what he mentioned, and you're like, no, this is definitely not for me, then I think you are going to have trouble. Personally, I have not faced any drawbacks as yet. I feel like it's just kind of been an easy ride. In terms of, debugging as well, it can sometimes be tricky to debug. As we all know, everything has a native footprint nowadays, so we want everything to be installable. And so when you're deving web, but it's for a mobile space, you are sometimes faced with challenges there as well, and kind of where that goes, right? So I think the longer you play, the more familiar it gets. I think in the beginning it can be quite tricky. That just happened. But yeah. So, yes, please.
So I've got a couple of side questions coming through. The first question is from Robert. Do you use Vue in prod?
Yes.
Cool.
We actually, so there's, like I said, there's a lot of like actual like prod examples out there that uses Vue, Netflix, 9gag, Nintendo. So those are also very big market competitors that are making use of this framework. So why not be the next Nintendo or the next Netflix?
I've got a question from Devesh. Awesome presentation, Mel. How do you ensure optimal performance on different client devices? Are there any benchmark tests to show which framework or library performs better with different devices, performance-wise, such as first pane, site loading, etc.?
Okay, so this is a performance benchmark test question from Nitish, watching from back home. I personally have not like written the same app in all three frameworks and kind of said, okay, let me see how badly I can break it. That is a talk for next year. But personally, I think it all depends on how you write your code and kind of the packages that you use and how heavy you make your app. Performance is a thing that we always kind of try and have in the back of our minds, and we do try and make sure that our apps perform well. Just because it's running great on a smartphone doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cater all that well for a feature phone. So I think it is definitely preeminent on like what type of device the user has, how your environment is set up, what cloud you're using. Like there's a whole bunch of factors to consider in that, and I think Vue, whether it be Vue, React, or Angular, I think it all just depends on kind of how you're writing and where you're going. I hope that answers your question, Nitish.
I've got one from Sean. Would you recommend Vue for a many-field, many-form, typical business OLTP, ERP type app?
I'll get back to you on that one. No, like that's a good question, right? Like that is a fantastic question, but it is something to think about. Because it's not necessarily, okay, cool, we're catering for this specific need, or it needs to do this specific thing. So I will definitely answer your question on Slack a little bit today after it's mingled in the brain.
Then one from Pamela. Excellent presentation, very engaging. What resources would you suggest for learning Vue?
Okay, so first off, the Vue documentation guide is absolutely fantastic, and there is great YouTube videos out there combining it with Laravel, trying to put it on top of a React app, trying to just write a simple Vue app from scratch. So the best place to start would be the Vue.js documentation, which is very easily found. You just type in Vue in Google, and you're pretty much set to go. That's it. All right, I think I rushed through that.
You have 1 more minute.
Oh, 1 more minute. No more question. Oh, there's a question at the back. Sorry.
The boilerplate for Vue, what is it like compared to like Angular? What do we get right off the bat?
So boilerplating. So that is an interesting question and a very interesting debate for me. So I am the type of person that tries to make use of third-party packages as less as possible. Unpopular opinion, but I feel like the moment I need to install something specifically for a need that I'm trying to cater for, if I can build it myself, I would like to do that. So I've got no issue actually going onto GitHub and kind of saying, okay, cool, how did they write it? How can I improve on it? If I need something simple like a calendar, or I need to integrate with, click on a link and send it to someone's Gmail or something, like those examples that we sometimes use, we want to use a third-party package for that or integrate with that. So the boilerplating with Vue, depending on how you write, is a little bit less, because the setup isn't that big. It's very much plug and play, if that makes sense. So as long as I've got my environments up and running, I can run it locally. I've pretty much got everything set up in my configuration files. I'm pretty much good to go. So I think with any framework, you are going to see boilerplating, and you are going to kind of expect, also depending on how you're writing and what need you're trying to fulfill. So you do want to try and keep that to a minimum as well, because that will also help with your performance. So yeah.
Sorry, I was incorrect. You have 9.
9 more minutes. Okay. So, all right. No more questions about Vue. Did I at least inspire you to go and try Vue? Cool. I'm going to try. No, it's fine. Yes, you can. More than welcome to scold. So pretty much in a nutshell, I'm sorry for racing through that. I thought I was 2 minutes too late. But my journey with Vue has been incredible, and it's certainly become one of my top frameworks. I started off with Angular when it was still Angular 2. And then I've done the web side of React and the mobile native development side with React. I'm currently part of a team that we use Vue and we do the sites, but it is obviously, it's kind of part of a native shell, if that makes sense. And I've had less headache and less trouble using Vue than what I did with the other 2 frameworks, oddly enough. I don't know if it's because I've had a little bit more experience, but I just find it to be a really cool, fun framework, and I can play around with it and do something very quickly, very simple. So yeah. And the other cool thing is it really does teach you the associated concepts. It really does kind of hold your hand and nurture you in terms of how you're going to go about writing your components, and what is installable and what is not, and what you kind of need to look out for, which kind of, I think, grows you as a developer when it comes to trying to use things like best practice and things like that. Yeah. Yes? Very interesting question, and I actually failed to mention that, and it is part of my notes. So another interesting thing about Vue, if this is something that you're concerned about, it is a growing community. So the same what we have with React, the same what we have with Angular, there is a GitHub community for it. There are thousands of projects out there. It also sees a lot of users kind of getting engaged online. There are answers on Stack Overflow. There are separate forums specifically for Vue, and I'd be happy to share some links with you afterwards if you wouldn't mind to come and see me afterwards. Right, yeah.
So where I kind of added my own was with VS Code, what do you call these extensions?
Yes.
So syntax highlighting, I know I didn't issue highlighting before, but highlighting properly, also the CSS as well. So I'm pretty sure, but although the V1 days, are there any new templates that have been put out that we can use and link that to the so much nicer. For example, I don't know, for some odd reason where maybe like my file talks to something else and I want to control the shape so I can go there.
Yeah, so there is a lot of extensions available. So his question was around VS Code and extensions in terms of making things easier, in terms of identifying problems, in terms of syntax highlighting, or this file is communicating with that file. There are a lot of Vue extensions, and they are continuously being added to the marketplace. Write your own one. I think it would be a really cool exercise. I definitely make use of it. But yeah, so I'd be happy to show you some of the extensions that I make use of, because yeah. So I think that would be really, really cool. Are there any more Slack questions? No. Skulk.
What would you like from Vue 4?
So Vue 4, well, we're only on Vue 3 now, right? So things that I would improve about Vue at the moment, like if I were to be put in that driver's seat, if you will, I actually don't know. Like that's quite interesting. Like I won't say it's perfect, right? Like nothing out there is perfect. Like if you're chasing perfection, you're going to be chasing forever, right? Like the reason we do what we do is we break things to build on top of it and to make it better. I think in terms of maybe for myself, I think this is a door that I would probably like to open a little bit more, is kind of trying to understand how can I get that native footprint more perfectly. Because I can't necessarily go into Android Studio and add a package, and I can't necessarily debug something very quickly on iOS without the right tools. So I think that that's maybe one of the things I'd like to see more support of going forward, is how can we kind of perfect using a JavaScript framework to have that native footprint and that native look and feel to it, rather than just saying, okay, cool, this is kind of like a PWA, or this is a single page app that we're making installable. I think that would be more like, that's one of the things that I'd...
There's a question in Slack about how do you manage state in Vue. It says NGRX is quite complex and annoying to write, referring to Angular. So
yeah.
the Angular dev
Yeah. Yeah, so for the question on Slack, the question is around state management and how we manage it in Vue. So Vue makes something, uses something called the Vuex or Vue Store. And it's very similar to what you have with React. So obviously you have your getters and your setters, and then you can just map your state. So immediately you just import your store, and then depending on what it is that you want to achieve or what it is that you are storing. So it's made the process a lot simpler. I struggled with React state management when I started with it, and I felt a lot more comfortable using Vue. And it's not just because I'm trying to be like the poster child for Vue or anything, but I found it to be simpler. So tools when it comes to testing Vue, so depending on what it is that I'm trying to test, I make use of Charles Proxy to make sure that my backend calls are coming through correctly, and then I also make use of the Chrome extensions that are available to me, because I'm mostly in Chrome most of the time, because that is kind of like what is required, and then I also test on Safari as well. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on Web3, knowing that you get a blockchain example and its adoption in the JavaScript space?
Can we chat afterwards? Because like I feel like this is going to be like a big debate, and I'd love to chat to you about it in terms of Web3. I'm more of like, I think, entered the space in terms of like Web2, and I'm kind of like more comfortable in the Web2 space. But we can definitely chat about it afterwards if that's cool. All right. Thank you. Have a beautiful day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.